Let us pray. Our Divine Father, as we conclude for this week our work in this assembly, we renew our thanks and ask that we may continue our work under your guidance on behalf of all the people of this province. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill 19, the Alberta Advisory Council on Women's Issues Act. Mr. Speaker, the presentation of this bill follows considerable consultation with women's groups and individual women throughout the province. It establishes an advisory council with a mandate to advise on matters relating to the opportunity for full and equal participation of women in the life of our province.
The Minister of Culture has moved first reading of Bill number 19, the Alberta Advisory Council on Women's Issues Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? Carried.
The Alberta Advisory Council on Women's Issues Act, introduced by Honourable Mr. Anderson, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I request further leave to introduce Bill 20, the Women's Secretariat Act. This act will consolidate the legislative authority of the Women's Secretariat under one statute and repeal the Women's Bureau Act.
The Minister of Culture has further moved first reading of Bill number 20, Women's Secretariat Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? So ordered.
A bill being Women's Secretariat Act, introduced by Honourable Mr. Anderson, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill PR 13, the Certified Management Consultants Act. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this bill is to incorporate and provide for the constitution of the Institute of Certified Management Consultants of Alberta.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Fish Creek has moved first reading of Bill PR 13, Certified Management Consultants Act. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
A bill being Certified Management Consultants Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Payne, is now read a first time.
Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 266, the Department of Multiculturalism Act. This bill would establish a separate Ministry of Multiculturalism to promote full and participation for all ethno-cultural communities in the life of the province of Alberta, and further establish a watchdog committee called the Intercultural Council.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Highlands has moved first reading of Bill 266, Department of Multiculturalism Act. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
A bill being Department of Multiculturalism Act, introduced by Honourable Member Ms. Barrett, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests. Ministerial statements.
Mr. Speaker, in the throne speech, the government gave its commitment to a full review of labour legislation, reinforcing statements made by the Premier since last fall and by myself since my appointment to the portfolio. I am pleased to announce today the formation of a broad-based committee to review labour legislation. The committee will thoroughly consider the principles and functions of the existing legislation and will review its operation over the past 12 years. Comparable legislation in other industrialized jurisdictions will be studied to determine if there are concepts which could usefully be incorporated into the Alberta system. The committee will travel to meet with and learn firsthand from those who have different labour legislation. At the conclusion of this part of the process, a preliminary report will be issued. I actively encourage individuals and groups or organisations to start developing their presentations forthwith, and I urge them to consider the preliminary report in the drafting of their submissions to the committee. These submissions and any verbal statements will be presented to the committee at public meetings to be held across the province later this year. The committee will include 3 individuals from organised labour, 3 from management, and 3 from the general public. Mr. Speaker, the committee members are the Chairman, myself, Bud Coots of Edmonton, International Vice President, Union of Operating Engineers, Wallace Daly of Granham, a rancher, Michael Day from Red Deer, the Commissioner for the City of Red Deer, Sheila Embry from Calgary, a retired Professor of Nursing and past MLA, Rick Forrest of Edmonton, President of Forest Construction, Norm LeClaire of Lethbridge, Business Representative, United Food and Commercial Workers, Bernice Luce of Ponoka, a farmer, Jack Murray of Calgary, Alberta Regional Director of the Canadian Union of Public Employees, and Murray Ross from Edmonton, Manager of Human Resources and Plant Services, Celanese Canada Incorporated. Mr. Speaker, the committee is taking on a significant responsibility. I am convinced that with the cooperation of the groups and individuals who will submit presentations, we can proceed with thoroughness and reasonable speed. I anticipate that the results will indeed be responsive to the needs and aspirations of employers and employees alike, and will represent fairly the attitudes of all Albertans. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, in replying to the ministerial statement by the announcement, I guess, first of all, one might say that one's hope always springs eternal, that this committee will do something. I, for one, am not very impressed, if I may say so. First of all, as we mentioned yesterday, it is totally outrageous that the 2 major labor groups have not been consulted about this process. And how you expect that you will have a process that will come to bear fruit in that sort of situation, I think you're dreaming in technicolor, Mr. Speaker. The people I have talked to since this announcement came out, and the fact that people in the 2 major labor groups were not even consulted, I've had overwhelming response that they think the thing is a farce. And if people think the thing is a farce to begin with, then this committee's into a great deal of difficulty. However, as I say, hope springs eternal, but I'm not going to hold my breath for anything constructive to come out of this.
Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, is it yet? Yes, I just wanted to raise the point now, though, as yesterday in the House, the Premier made a personal attack on a duly elected representative of a bona fide labor organization. I don't think of any personal feelings or making public policy. All members of this legislature, and in particular the Premier, must rise above their personal feelings. I think the Premier's...
Order, please. The member is raising what probably is a point of privilege, and points of privilege should have 2 hours notice with the Speaker before they're raised in the Assembly. That's my ruling. Thank you. Please.
Well, to direct my first question to the provincial treasurer. And we've noticed, Mr. Speaker, that by a stroke of the pen in Bill 18, we have reduced our deficit by almost $100 million. No wonder we call him Tricky Dicky. But my question now to the minister, is it the policy of this government, then, that the amount of resource revenue going into the trust fund should be reduced so that, in fact, the trust fund is now going to pay for energy incentive programs?
Mr. Speaker, I would have to have that question again because there's two allusions there which have caused me some concern with respect to the point of view the leader is expressing.
No, my question very simply, flowing from what seems to be government policy in Bill 18, is it now the policy of the government that the trust fund is going to pay for energy incentive programs?
Mr. Speaker, the energy incentive programs are revenue offsets, and those offsets, of course, are deducted from the gross royalties collected by the province, and obviously, if there's a revenue offset flowing to the private sector, some influence or some impact will, of course, be seen in the Heritage Fund. But mostly, Mr. Speaker, the revenue offsets are reflected in the estimates of revenue, and that's why the one-third approach was so appropriate.
I think the minister better look at Bill 18 because it's, in fact, a difference of $100 million that's going into general revenue that ordinarily would go into the trust fund. My question is that energy incentives are a big ticket item for this government, which it looks like may become more expensive in the future. Has the government then made a policy decision that the amount of revenue going into the trust fund should be significantly reduced so that the treasurer can appear to meet his rather questionable target of a budgetary deficit of only $2.5 billion this year?
No, Mr. Speaker, there's no change in policy.
There's a change in the legislation that was, in fact, causing this. My question then to the treasurer, perhaps the premier, in view of the fact that this is happening, what consideration has either honourable gentleman made in permitting the Standing Committee of the Trust Fund to review the energy incentives of this government, since incentive decisions will have much to do now with the growth of this fund?
Speaker, again, it should be clear that the offsets are affecting the general revenue fund in particular, and our assumptions are that any kind of incentives, the two recent ones in '86 and the two in 1985, will be revenue offsets. And on that basis, the impact is directly on the general revenue fund. In a very nominal way is it on the Heritage Fund. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, it seemed to me that it would be essentially outside of the Heritage Fund responsibility because it's a general revenue item and it's debated here in terms of the estimates which are now flowing through the Committee of Supply.
Supplementary question. There's a difference of $100 million. That may not seem like a lot of money to the treasurer, but that is the difference. My question to the treasurer is what other measures is the treasurer planning which will drain the trust fund in order to reduce the budgetary deficit?
Well, to the contrary, Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the trust fund is being increased by both internal earnings, which I referred to yesterday. A fairly significant amount of income-earning assets are implicit in that fund. Some $12 billion worth of income-earning assets are now collecting revenue for the Heritage Fund and increasing. And therefore, that money is accumulated in the Heritage Fund, but as well, the revenues, the royalty revenues are staying in that fund. And of course, by appropriation, some of the money does flow to the General Revenue Fund to the extent of about $1.5 billion from memory, and that, of course, is used to supplement the other income flows to the province. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, there's no change in policy.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the treasurer. His absence of the Minister of Energy, possibly the Premier, but I think the treasurer. But is the government considering taking changes in the drilling or making changes in the drilling incentive program now that the program is obviously not being taken up or in very small amounts, as the Minister of Energy said the other day?
Well, I think, Mr. Speaker, it's fair to say that we're assessing all the incentive programs, and there has been obviously a review of the two most recent programs to see if, in fact, they're directly impacting the industry. An Energy Committee, which is chaired by the Premier and the Minister of Energy, are considering at all times feedback on this information.
The member for Little Bow.
Question to the Provincial Treasurer, and it's in terms of the capability of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund funding ongoing projects because of the effect, the relative effect of reduced royalties. We certainly have effect on the revenue for the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. Could the Provincial Treasurer indicate whether there will be a reduction in the projects being funded in the upcoming or the current fiscal year? And secondly, are we facing any kind of a deficit in funding ongoing projects that are now in place?
Mr. Speaker, obviously, as the income flows into the Heritage Savings Trust Fund is reduced, then, of course, the availability of money for those very important investments which the Heritage Fund is conducting, including medical research, the Heritage Savings Trust Fund scholarship, and irrigation investments in particular, may have to be reconsidered on a time frame. One of the major problems we have is that in one of the sections, the Alberta section, of course, which is by legislation limited to 20% of the fund, we may have to be careful that we don't bump up against some maximum based on our expectation of cash flow or revenue flows in the future. But that's a valid concern, and I think all members in the Heritage Committee will have an opportunity to discuss that once the Heritage Fund is referred to them for consideration.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct this question to the Minister responsible for technology, research, and telecommunications. Mr. Speaker, the government seemed to confirm in answer to my colleague from Mountain View yesterday that the amount of the government loan going to Western Aerospace Technology Limited will be $1 million. Yet the budget books propose a $500,000 loan. My question is to the Minister, does this mean that half of the loan will be doled out immediately and the other half will await performance?
No, Mr. Speaker. To the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, it means that if the criteria on which the loan are contingent are met by the company, then half of the loan would be paid out of this fiscal year and half would be paid out in the next fiscal year.
Interesting, Mr. Speaker. This appears and is a free interest loan, which is a very special sort of business deal. Can the Minister assure this Assembly that the provision of this loan had nothing to do at all with the personal involvement of Mr. Chapman, who is the recent chair of AOC? In fact, that it's not a special favor to an old friend.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has raised a very unfortunate implication in his question or his preamble. Mr. Speaker, to rise above the kind of imputation that was contained in the preamble to the question, I would remind the Honourable Leader that in this province we need jobs, and we have a proposition brought to us by a number of airline-related companies and individuals with experience who have the potential in the proposal advanced to us to create an opportunity for quite a number of jobs in Alberta of a very high quality. Mr. Speaker, that is the reason for the government proposal to support this business proposition.
Well, we're certainly creating jobs, all right, for high-placed Tories. But my question to the Minister is, if this, how was this particular company chosen? In other words, were other companies even considered?
Mr. Speaker, the business of overhauling aircraft is not something that everybody is able to do or that all kinds of companies are able to do. This group of individuals and companies put together a consortium, came to us with a proposal to bring into Alberta a potentially very major aircraft refurbishing company. Surely that is something that we'd like to have. And surely, Mr. Speaker, it is not something in which there is a tremendous amount of competition. We have one other company capable of refurbishing aircraft in this province. We would be very much strengthened if we had more than one.
Well, that's a very interesting answer. The answer is no. They just happen to have the technology. Just walked in. So my question is to the Minister then, will members, other members of the business community, say from my constituency of Edmonton-Norwood, be able to waltz in and ask for interest-free million-dollar loans from this government, or is this a privilege provided by former directors of Crown corporations and good Tories?
Mr. Speaker, in the business of job creation and the attempt to expand technology, I don't look at the gait or the manner of walk of any of the proponents of any projects, nor do I look at the constituency from which they come. If, Mr. Speaker, the honourable leader has asked whether we would consider any reasonable proposition, and if it is well considered, if it shows some potential, and if, Mr. Speaker, there is a large element, a very major element of private sector financial involvement, which takes, in this case, almost a total risk, we would certainly be pleased to examine those kinds of business proposals. They are very important to the expansion of our economy, the broadening of our economy, and to the creation of jobs, and surely that's what all of us in this Assembly want to achieve.
Member for Calgary. Member for West Loch Sturgeon.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. This is to the Premier. In view of the questions asked by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, twice now you failed to answer, Mr. Premier. When are we going to get a law, a cooling off law of at least 1 year for a retired cabinet minister or a retired officer of the Crown before they can participate in business with the Crown?
Mr. Speaker, there are a great number of Albertans who participate from every walk of life in helping to run the various volunteer organizations and boards in this province, supported by the government. These people make a tremendous contribution to this province, and I think any attempt to somehow, because of the fact they've contributed to the province and helped on the boards on a volunteer basis, that they would somehow no longer be able to participate in the business life of the province, I think is a foolish request.
Main question, Leader of the Liberal Party.
Even the federal Tories have a 1-year cooling off period. But anyhow, Mr. Premier, next week thousands of Alberta oilmen will be here seeking answers in this from this legislature, which we've failed to get from the Premier and his government to date. The government has created widespread uncertainty with maybes, I'll study, yes or no answers for our questions. I'm in the prologue here. 20, 30, 40,000 jobs that depend on a competent management of Alberta's energy policy. Now, has the Premier formulated a progressive policy for the use of funds to be left in Alberta after the PGRT is discontinued?
Mr. Speaker, it sounds very hypothetical to me.
I did not say if, I said when. I have more faith in his government than obviously he has in Ottawa. As a matter of fact, some MPs are saying be over. But anyhow, let's go on. How will the minister encourage or coax the 52 larger companies which pay the PGRT to spend their money on jobs in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, we've discussed this in the House before, that should the federal government remove the PGRT, the companies who have been paying it would presumably do several things with those funds. They would perhaps do some additional drilling or exploration or seismic. They may pay off their bank loans. They may use the funds to increase their salaries. They may use the funds to purchase smaller companies. Whether the federal government, in removing the PGRT, tries to build into that removal some incentive to have the funds invested is something for the federal government to decide. For our part, we do not believe that you should have government civil servants trying to force companies to do certain things.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, I'd remind him the federal government will not be giving us any money. They will just be leaving money here that they're taking out now. Will the minister reduce royalty, or will the Premier consider reducing royalties on new development drilling to the 1972 level or lower?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for West Loch Sturgeon surely isn't listening when he asks questions. He's asked this question before, and I told him that when there's development drilling, there are no royalties.
Exploratory. Sorry, supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. I've been missing a on development drilling.
Honourable member, the chair apologizes. It's a question of supplementaries. It's a question. The preamble deals with the main part to your first question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand corrected. Will the minister Premier extend the royalty-free period on discovery wells from the present 1 year to 3 years?
Mr. Speaker, on discovery wells, there is a time period of up to 5 years. And there's also, contrary to what the honourable member suggested, there is a, not just on exploratory wells is there a royalty-free period, but for development wells as well.
Question to the Premier, and my question is in line with my concern for the 400 or 500 small companies outside of these 52 that will receive benefits by the removal of the PGRT. Could the Premier indicate what alternate steps or complementary steps may be put in place or are being considered at this time to assist those small companies to stay in place and at least a holding position in this province during this difficult time?
Mr. Speaker, that's exactly the people who I think require the assistance as much as possible, and the government is working on several options that will help those small companies. We want to provide some type of income stabilization to assist them over the period of time in which they are faced with the instability in international energy prices. We are working on those various options right now. We think that the ones that we are developing will be the kind that small companies would be very pleased with.
Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
My question is to the Premier. The Minister of Energy has announced a reduction in royalty rates. Can the Premier give us any assurance that this will result in new exploration or drilling activity in the province of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, that's something we'll have to see. It's clear that when industry has additional funds in the past with fair pricing for their product, that they have stepped up their exploration and development drilling. And I think if we could have a stable energy price at sufficient level, that we would see them step up their exploration development once again.
Leader of the Representative Party, main question, followed by the member for Cypress Redcliffe.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier as well. Last Thursday night, Constable Marcel Simard of the St. Hubert Police Force became the third police officer slain on duty in Canada in 1986. Repeated calls have been made by police organization and various private interest groups for a return of capital punishment in Canada, and that matter goes unaddressed. My question to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, is would the Premier consider having a free vote in the legislature of Alberta as a vote indicating the direction of this province relative to capital punishment, and will give some incentive to our Alberta MPs and the government in Ottawa to take a stand on this matter?
Mr. Speaker, there is a motion on the order paper now dealing with this matter, and it's been discussed once in the House. I have my personal views regarding capital punishment. I believe we should have it, but I would have to give consideration as to whether the House would deal with it on a complete free vote.
Supplementary question. Okay. Member for Cypress Redcliffe, followed by the member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Agriculture, and it's relating to the Farm Credit Stability Fund Act. I believe it was Wednesday, July 30th, that we did third reading, and I think the House Leader said we are going to do royal assent today on that bill. My question is, now that third reading's done, calls from constituents are coming, that we've kept on saying it's going to be next week, it's going to be next week, and it's going to be next week. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister, when is it going to be, and when will he announce this program?
Mr. Speaker, in response to the honourable member's question, can I indicate to him our thanks to the Legislative Assembly for proceeding so quickly with this very important legislation. As the honourable member indicated, it will receive royal assent today, and it was only appropriate that we have the legislation in place prior to proceeding with such a significant outlay of funds. We are going to conduct a press conference on Wednesday at 11 o'clock in which we're going to release all the fine details As it relates to this program, the program is effective today. Once we receive royal assent, we're hopeful that the banking institutions will have an opportunity over the long weekend to review the program manual in a very detailed way, and I hope to conduct a press conference at 11 o'clock on Wednesday with all the details as it relates to the program.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question. If the press conference is to be Wednesday, when is the money available to the farmers?
The farmers can start to approach the banks next week. We just want to make sure that the banks have an opportunity to review our program manual and that they do follow the guidelines within the manual. I can indicate to the honourable member that it's our hope, and that is why the government has been so involved, that the banks will follow through with our suggestions and regulations, and there's no doubt that they will, because the lending criteria is much more lenient than what it is under the traditional sense.
Second supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister. Mr. Minister, is there going to be any sort of a mechanism whereby if the banks and the clients don't agree, that they can approach somebody else to decide on if they're will be able to receive the loan?
There is a mechanism outlined in our program manual, Mr. Speaker, of which we have indicated to the banks we expect them to follow very closely. As I mentioned to the honourable member earlier, there are requirements in there whereby they have to expand their lending criteria so that this money is available to a broader spectrum of farmers than what is traditionally the case. Other than that, I'm not sure what more I can add to the honourable member except to compliment him on his excellent questions rather than wallowing in the gutter like the other parties do.
Supplementary question, member for Little Bow.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Agriculture and is relative to the Wednesday press conference. Would it be the intention of the Minister at that press conference, along with making statements on the Farm Credit Stability Program, to indicate the government's position relative to the deficiency payment for farmers of Canada and specifically Alberta at the same time?
Mr. Speaker, in responding to the honourable member for Little Bow, I can share with him I had the opportunity to discuss this with our federal Minister of Agriculture. It falls directly under Charlie Mayer, the minister responsible for the wheat board. They felt it only appropriate that they wait to see what the crop conditions were for this upcoming crop year before making any final announcement as to what type of a deficiency payment they would be making. But as the honourable member is aware, this government has been very persistent and has pursued in a very vigorous basis our proposal to them whereby a deficiency payment should be made to our grain sector.
Member for Vegreville.
Supplementary to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, on this set of questions, and I realize he deep down he does appreciate my advice on these matters. Has the Minister instructed lending institutions to concentrate their efforts on the refinance debt consolidation type loans, in other words, the Schedule A and B loans in your manual? Concentrate on those loans first rather than new monies for land and machinery.
Mr. Speaker, it is our hope, and may I say I do appreciate the honourable member's advice, because it's encouraging to see that he rarely does wallow in the gutter like his leader does. But,
Thank you, Honourable Minister. We'll proceed, please.
And to indicate to him that it is our hope that the majority of this funding, as the provincial treasurer indicated, will be used for refinancing purposes, and our projections show that approximately 3/4 of this fund will be used for refinancing purposes.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister. While he's wallowing in the tub with the Federal Agriculture Minister, has he had a chance? Was the order from you, or I'm sorry? Has he had a chance, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. Has he had a chance to once again press the federal agricultural minister to reduce the loans rates on those farm credit loans that are above 9% so that we can avoid the rollovers here with our own money and let the money go as far as possible.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to have the opportunity for the third time to respond to the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon, and it's because of the attitude of this government and the working relationship that we wish to develop with other sectors, whether they be the federal government, a municipal government, or labor or management, that we accomplished items such as the Honourable Minister of Hospital announced yesterday, and we're going to continue with that approach so that we can accomplish something for the Alberta people rather than the antagonistic approach of the Honourable Member.
Final supplementary on the main question, member for Cypress Redcliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister, again to the Minister of Agriculture related on the Stability Fund. And my concern is, I may be a little late, Mr. Member, but I still had one supplementary left. My question is that I would hope those...
Honourable Member, the Chair apologizes that the member for Cypress Redcliffe was not given notice with respect to his third supplementary at the time he was asking his main question. And indeed, it is a departure from the form of the House to now come back to it. The Chair apologizes and then recognizes the member for Calgary Forest Lawn, followed by the member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
In the absence of the Minister of Energy, Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. As the Premier is aware, Suncor has a $105 million project at Burt Lake that has the potential to produce about 25,000 barrels of oil a day. It's about 60% completed. Can the Premier confirm that this project is about to be abandoned?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary then, what information does the Premier have about reports that half of the 70-odd heavy oil projects in Alberta are in danger of closing or shutting down?
Mr. Speaker, most people in Alberta know, and I'm sure members of the legislature know, that the problems with instability and energy prices have caused a great deal of trouble to our energy industry. In some cases, it would lead to high-cost plants closing down, but in other cases, the companies are able to develop efficiencies and allow themselves to continue in operation. We hope, Mr. Speaker, that with changes in international pricing and with other assistance, both from federal government, provincial government, that we will be able to have as many of these projects as possible continue to operate.
Supplementary to the Premier, given the Minister of Technology's concern for job creation, does the government have any proposals, such as equity participation, to offer to these large projects in the heavy oil section of the industry?
Mr. Speaker, that's one of the options that is considered.
And finally, my final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. When is the government going to admit that the Western Accord is a failure, that it's devastating the economy of Alberta, and when is it going to propose an alternative?
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe it's the details of the Western Accord that is causing the problems. Certainly the international energy prices are a big problem for the people of Alberta, and we are doing everything possible to help the industry to work their way through these problems with a positive assistance for industry rather than merely complaining as they do opposite.
Member for Calgary Buffalo.
Mr. Premier, has the government taken a position on the complaints of the oil industry that is receiving a very unfair price from the very few refiners who are purchasing oil in the province, or is it still studying the matter after 8 months?
No, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is right. It's an important matter that the few purchasers of oil in this province appear to have tended to beat the price down on the downside and lag the price up on the upside. We've asked the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission and the Minister of Energy to meet with these purchasers and to work out a method that will eliminate that problem.
Thank you. Member for Edmonton Gold-Bar, followed by the member for Calgary-McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health. In the light, Mr. Speaker, of the increasing demand for after-school care, particularly in Alberta's urban centres, and also in the light of the Minister's comments during debate last evening, is the government presently considering making after-school care a universal program with minimum standards across the province?
Mr. Speaker, as I said in the review of our estimates last night in the Assembly, I've received, as the government has received, the report of the Intermunicipal Task Force on out-of-school care. It's something that I discussed with members of that task force in early July. The meeting was on July the 2nd, if I'm not mistaken. And it's my hope that following consultation and discussion with a number of my colleagues in Cabinet and in caucus, that I will be able to get back to the task force and be able to respond to their proposal.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary, has the government done any studies to determine cost and cost effectiveness of a universal program of out-of-school care?
Mr. Speaker, that would certainly be part of our review of that proposal, and would be considered when we're coming back to that group.
Mr. Speaker, another supplementary. Is the government considering setting up such a program independent but within the shared formula of FCSS so that municipalities will continue to undertake part of the costs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think I've answered that question now twice, and if I may, I'd just like to restate some of the comments that I made last night before you cut me off on debatable points. But it's something that is clearly something that we're looking at, and it becomes a philosophical discussion, at least in the initial context, and it was a philosophical discussion that I had with members of that task force when we met in early July. And it is a matter of it's a matter of determining what kind of care, what kind of support, and the degree and the nature of that support that government provides vis-a-vis what the community provides for that kind of service.
Mr. Speaker, a final supplementary, hardly philosophical at this point. Will the minister undertake to respond to that task force recommendation within the next 2 weeks, since there are many waiting, the demand is there, and not all families have access to the neighbors' families, aunties and grannies, as suggested last night?
Speaker. No, Mr. Speaker, I recognize that, and if, to be fair, the honourable member heard me say that in the review of my estimates last night in the Committee of Supply. But don't forget, Mr. Speaker, let's not let the honourable member across the way forget that there has been a 30% increase in the amount that's provided under the Family and Community Support Services to the City of Edmonton and to the City of Calgary and to all of the cities in this province. Some, if I'm not mistaken, some $7.5 million going to the City of Edmonton in Edmonton this year, and those kind of services dictated by the priorities set down by local municipalities. They then have an opportunity to decide where they're going to spend those dollars, and in this case, I believe the City of Edmonton is very committed to out-of-school care, and we support them, and we will continue to support them through the Family and Community Support Services grant of the Department of Community Health.
Member for Calgary, member for Edmonton Calder.
Supplementary to the minister. Will the minister guarantee to this Assembly today that no child will go without after-school care if they are in need of that service?
At this point, Mr. Speaker, it is a program of that is funded and is a priority of certain municipalities in this province, Edmonton being one of them, and Edmonton has the wherewithal, and certainly with a 30% increase in the grant from Family and Community Support Services, they certainly have the wherewithal to provide that service as they so wish in this province, in this city today.
Member for Calgary-McCall, followed by the member for Edmonton Highlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Excuse me. Mr. Speaker, I have a question to the Minister of Manpower. The Minister last week announced an enhancement of and extensions for the wage subsidy program and the summer temporary program, and considering the comments from some that it was too late, can the Minister of Manpower advise the House as to the current status of the number of new applications presently being processed?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the member from McCall's ongoing interest in the Summer Temporary Employment Program. And I'd like to say that to advise the members of the House that we are extremely pleased with the interest shown in our enhancement of these two programs, the Alberta Wage Subsidy Program and the Summer Temporary Employment Program. I can advise that as of today, we have had 2,100 new applications for the extension under this program, Mr. Speaker. And I think that that's a testimonial that the largest per capita summer job creation program in this country is working, and it's working well.
Mr. Speaker, can the Minister give some indication of the interest and support from the business community for this new program?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Of the 2,100 new applications that I just referred to, 1,100 of those programs come under the Alberta Wage Subsidy Program, and I think that that is also clear that the timing of this program was coincident with the seasonal needs of farmers, tourist operators, and other small businesses in this province.
Mr. Speaker, considering the difficulty in Edmonton, can the Minister indicate to what extent the Edmonton City, or the City of Edmonton, has picked up this program for the damaged, flooding area of the city as to the number of people they're employing?
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased when I had a discussion with Mayor Decor and Alderman White, and at the suggestion of the Minister of Environment, the city did make application to the province so that they could put students to work in assisting in the cleanup in the province, particularly in the Edmonton area. And I might say that both the mayor and the alderman were extremely pleased at our offer of the extension of that program. And to date, my most recent numbers indicate that there are close to 100 applications come in from the City of Edmonton to assist under the enhancements to those programs to help the people that, and the lands and property that was damaged under the flood.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister. This short-term extension of student employment programs doesn't address the problem of chronic youth unemployment. Given that the Minister the other day emphasized how excited he was about his new youth entrepreneur program with the YMCA, can he please indicate how many business opportunities long-term and therefore how many jobs long-term he expects will be created by as small a commitment as $125,000?
If the honourable member, if his memory serves him correctly, Mr. Speaker, he would recall that our portion, our commitment is a tripartite commitment with the private sector and with the Government of Canada. The number of jobs that, incubator jobs that will be created under that program for youth will be somewhere between 60 and 80, and our initial indications under this program will indicate that there could be as many as 150 jobs created as a result of this initiative between our department, the federal government, and the private sector.
Member for Edmonton Highlands.
Speaker, in the absence of the Minister for Recreation and Parks, I'd like to ask the Minister for Economic Development and Trade if he can confirm that as things stand now, the video film recording the official record, I suppose, of the '88 Olympics will go to the American TV network ABC?
Mr. Speaker, I'd have to take that question as notice and respond later to the honourable member and advise the Minister of Recreation and Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a point of information, then, I'll just say that there is a decision pending by September. I wonder, with that knowledge, then, if the minister has any plans to make representation to his federal counterparts that it's important to have this film being made in Alberta by Albertans in the name of economic diversification.
Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons the government established the Alberta Film Development Corporation was for precisely that reason. The Alberta Film Development Corporation has had considerable success in providing seed capital to film producers, and it has resulted in considerable expenditure of funds in the production of movies in Alberta. We'll continue those initiatives through the Film Development Corporation and others because it's the kind of industry that is footloose and can provide jobs. For example, a recent film that was filmed in the Lac-La-Biche area resulted in millions of dollars being left in that region in terms of services and salaries. So the film industry is important to Alberta, and we'll continue the initiatives that we have already started over the past number of years.
Precisely what I'm on about. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if I could direct my second supplementary to the Minister of Manpower and ask the Minister if he has any figures or undertaken any studies to determine how many Alberta jobs might be lost in the arts communities and technical communities if the film contract is not awarded to people in Alberta.
The phrasing of the question makes the whole question into a hypothetical. Perhaps further supplementary?
I'd be prepared to rephrase that. Has the minister undertaken any studies to determine how many jobs would be created if the... Oh. Mr. Speaker, rather than fiddle with this, I'm going to change the question and go to a final supplementary. I'd like to direct this question to the Minister of Culture. Will the Minister of Culture communicate to his federal counterparts that the job potential in Alberta with respect to this film is extremely important and that this item must be kept in mind when we get to the negotiating table in September?
I'd be very pleased to investigate the situation with my colleague, the Minister of Parks and Recreation, when he returns next week and consider the representation made.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Manpower, would he make the representations or check with his federal counterpart to see that the temporary permits that are granted to the company to kind of bring in employees to do the filming would be restricted to the lowest possible minimum in order that as many people be employed in Alberta as possible?
I'll either have to have the member say that again in shorter sentences, or I'll look at the blues and respond to him later on in the next week, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, there's been no collusion with my friend there to make sure I get up often, but this is to the minister again. Will he check with his federal counterpart, Minister of Manpower, to see that the temporary permits that are granted to American organization coming in to do the filming are kept to a minimum in order to force the organization to hire as many people as possible in Alberta to do the filming?
Got it.
Well, Mr. Speaker, certainly anything that this government can do to assist in creating jobs in this province, I'm more than willing to look at. I should remind the honourable member that the jurisdiction that he talks about and refers to is the jurisdiction of the federal government. However, in any case, I would be more than pleased to discuss the matter with my federal counterpart.
Member for Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Agriculture regarding the farm loan program. The minister yesterday refused to release details of this program to the elected members in the Assembly, preferring instead to wait till a press conference to tell us about it. I'll give him a second chance. Will the minister confirm that land to be taken as security under the provisions of this program will have to be reassessed as to its value?
Time for question period has expired. Will the Assembly agree to this original questioner finishing his own set of supplementaries only on this issue? Honourable members should listen carefully. The original member who moves it and his set of supplementaries only. That is what has been agreed to by the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it's obvious the honourable member didn't listen too well yesterday. I indicated to him when the provincial treasurer tabled this legislation on June the 27th in this House, he issued with it a news release that went into a number of details as it related to the program. Had the honourable member had the foresight and read his mail as the honourable member for Dunvegan did, he would have known most of this.
Nice try, Mr. Minister. I read it, and it doesn't specify that provision in there. I'll try the provincial treasurer. Supplementary to the provincial treasurer, foreclosures at treasury branches and the ADC continue. Will there be any moratorium on these actions until farmers can make application and qualify under this program?
Right.
Mr. Speaker, I think that in the case of the treasury branches, they have been instructed to do everything possible to ensure that the loans which were in trouble are maintained until the program is now in place. And as the Minister's indicated, as of July 31st, 1986, the program will be up and operating. And next week, as we promised, the program will be in full fling. And therefore, those that are in some concern in the farm sector can obviously now appeal to the banker because the program is in place.
Supplementary again to the Honourable Provincial Treasurer. Has he given any consideration to the effects of the reassessment provision on individual producers' ability to qualify and on the status, the liquidity of other loans that might be affected by farmland in general being reassessed as to its value?
Yes, I have, Mr. Speaker.
Orders of the day.